On this week's Gridiron Report, we have Dan Campbell's new staff beginning to take form. The Pistons are doing something we haven't seen in the NBA in quite some time, and we have a new listener voicemail, so let's get into it.
Yeah. In the heart of the city where the lights grow dim, grit and grind every inch, every rim. From the underdogs rising to the legends that win. It's the Gridiron Report, let the games begin. Every highlight's a journey, roads paved with fire, sweat, tears, and hustle that never expire. From the rookies on the rise to the old hands retire, Gridiron is the place for fans to conspire. Hustle on blast, beats thundering loud. Champions are born from the roar of the crowd. The Gridiron Report, where the stories are proud.
All right, welcome to the Gridiron Report, your Lions First All Detroit Sports podcast. Today is Tuesday, January 28th. And before we get into any sports whatsoever, I have two quick things that we need to touch on. The first one's a good thing. The second one is just an absolute terrible thing. So let's start with these two. The first is a good thing. Let's start with the good. First, we have to shout out, if you listen this far, you know we have a new theme song. Shout out to Aaron, who just put it together for us. Makes us feel like we actually know what we're doing a little bit here on this sports podcast.
Aaron, you're the man. I mean, Tyler sent me this theme song a couple of days ago, and like my jaw hit the floor, man. So yeah, we just want to thank you so much, and we're so pumped to have a sick theme song.
And so the other thing, that being the good, the other thing being the bad, it's just an absolute travesty. I don't know if you saw this. I don't know if you heard about this. You read about this. Lafayette, Coney Island has once again been shut down for rats. If you are a Detroiter, you obviously are either Lafayette, Coney Island, or American Coney Island. I'm a Lafayette boy. This is now the second time in 6 months or so that they've been shut down for rats. A lot of beef going on between Lafayette, Coney Island, and American Coney Island. But I asked the health inspector, which restaurant down in Detroit doesn't have rats? Open it up. Lafayette is some place everyone can go down. You know it's going to be overcrowded. You know you can get beer in the can. You know that it's going to be busy. People are going to be yelling. Somehow there's always inexplicably just like an AAU basketball team packed in there, all squeezing to a table. It's an absolute travesty that once again they're shut down. Just let them be. Give us our Coney dogs.
This is probably the worst thing to happen to Detroit in weeks. I mean, this is much worse than any sports loss or anything like that. I mean, yeah, I say again, city health inspector, what's going on here? I mean, it's one rat, couple of rats. What are we doing here? This is Lafayette, Coney Island we're talking about. I know we're both pretty big on Lafayette. I know American Coney Island, which is right next door, has launched a complete hate campaign against Lafayette. I mean, when is it going to end? Let's just open the boys back up because the people need their Coney dogs.
The people need the Coney dogs now more than ever. It's a terrible thing pitting these two, and they've been going against each other for quite some time, and they've been friends every now and again. But yesterday morning, American Coney Island came out and said that they're all pissed off at Lafayette. Lafayette came back out today and said that they're actually closed for renovations, which is a great spin job on their part. But let's just pray and hope that Lafayette gets open once again after these quote unquote remodeling. They get back better than ever. But those are the two things I wanted to start with. Shout out Aaron for this fantastic theme song. And no shout out to the health inspector that shut down Lafayette, Coney Island for the rats. Supposedly rats.
Shame.
Okay, let's get into some actual sports. We know a little bit about sports. We like to talk about sports. Let's get into it. We'll start with the Detroit Lions. We talked ad nauseum last week about the loss, the devastating loss. Before we actually jump into the coaching carousel, who's going where, who's been promoted, all that stuff, Kyle, we saw the Eagles absolutely dismantle the Commanders. I want to ask you real quick, if the Lions are in that game, do they beat the Eagles, or do they stand a chance, at least a better chance than Washington did?
Man, I don't even know because that was an absolute ass kicking. And yeah, the Eagles, I mean, 7 touchdowns on the ground. Saquon's first run was a 7-yard bomb touchdown. Yeah, I just don't know. I think we saw a lot of flaws in the Detroit Lions team when they played the Commanders last weekend. If the Eagles play like that, man, I would love to say that, yeah, the Lions, best team in the world. They just had an off day. They could beat anyone. I don't know, man. I think if the Eagles are playing like that, granted the game would have been in Ford Field, but I would have to give the edge to the Eagles, and that sucks to say. I'm just trying to be real.
I guess, yeah, there are a few different edges that the Lions would have. Like you said, it would have been at Ford Field. You were right, and Saquon just ran all over the Commanders. The Lions' rush defense this season was pretty good. They obviously the secondary got toasted time and time again, but the run defense was pretty decent. At times, it was actually elite. So maybe we would have stood a better chance against Saquon there. I did see a stat that said, and I have no idea if this is true. I saw it on Twitter. Didn't do any fact checking. That the Eagles had more rushing touchdowns in the NFC Championship game than the Dallas Cowboys had all season, which is just fantastic. That makes me so happy. I'm actually a big Saquon fan. Obviously, if Detroit would be playing him, it'd be a whole different story. But I thought that was just a hilarious stat.
Yeah, woof. Yeah, shout out the Cowboys, man. Y'all had a season.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. It would be interesting to at least see what the line would have been. Being at Ford Field, you think the Lions had to have been favored, but we'll get into the coaching carousel stuff. So we went in last week's episode talking about Ben Johnson had officially taken the Bears job. We talked a little bit about what that means for Detroit, what that means for Ben. If you recall, or if you can go back and listen to last week's episode, I was a little bit frustrated. Everyone knows Ben Johnson was destined to go out and get a head coaching job. If you didn't think so, if you're mad at him going to take a head coaching job, it's not really realistic. These guys deserve to be, to get that promotion, get their chance at being a head coach. I was just frustrated that he went to an interdivision team in the Bears. Kyle was a little bit more level-headed. We were both kind of a little frustrated. I was obviously frustrated about him interviewing during the playoffs and stuff like that. But we have a few more updates as it relates to coaching. The first, I guess, just staying with Ben Johnson and the Bears. So Ben Johnson, after he did come out and say he will not be raiding Dan Campbell's coaching staff, he came out and stole Antoine Randall, who was formerly the Lions receiving coach. He stole him. He is now going to be joining Ben Johnson on the Bears staff. I think that's quietly a pretty big blow. You look at the receiving staff that the Lions have had. You turn Amon-Ra St. Brown into an absolute steal. And Amon-Ra is a fantastic player. He's got an insane work ethic. So maybe he would have still turned into the player he was or he is if we didn't have Antoine Randall. But he's done a fantastic job kind of honing in Jameson Williams' skills, getting him in the right positions, doing a great job with guys who are kind of the third and fourth receivers on a lot of teams, bringing them in here and putting them in great positions. The Khalif Raymonds, the Tim Patricks, the Josh Reynolds, being just kind of those guys that randomly show up in different games and be who we need them to be. So kind of a sneaky loss for Detroit. And, like I said, shame on Ben Johnson a little bit for saying he's not going to raid Dan Campbell's staff and then immediately takes, one of his go-to guys.
I did not see where Ben Johnson said he wasn't going to raid the cupboard. So yeah, I'm definitely not calling you there, but I do think it's something that it happens pretty often. And we'll talk about, the Lions passing coordinator, who also, could be poached by the Jets. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, I mean, I do think Antoine Randall, he's a good coach. We know he's a good coach. We know what he's done, with our, receiving room. I'm not super worried. I think that, I don't know, a wide receiver coach is a wide receiver coach at the end of the day. And, we have studs at the wide receiver position, and there's no reason to think that any of those guys will take a step back now that a different coach is in there. If anything, more worried about the offensive coordinator and the impact that he could have on this receiving core. But yeah, I mean we'll talk about that. I'm not super worried. I'm not raising the red flag about losing Antoine Randall. He's it is what it is.
Yeah. So going into some of the coaches that we were able to hire, we had a lot of holes to fill, obviously. The first one that came out, we'll kind of do this in a little chronological order as they kind of came out across the last week. The first one was a huge hiring, and that was the hiring of the defensive line coach. So we lost our original defensive line coach, who obviously we just mentioned, the Lions' run defense. The defensive line, for as many injuries as we've had, the defensive line was actually pretty good. They were great against the rush. When we had a healthy Hutch, they were pretty good with pressure against the pass. It was a kind of a point of strength. And then as we kind of got more and more injured, they did a great job trying to stay afloat. So losing our defensive line coach was a pretty big deal, but they went out and got one of the best defensive line coaches in the NFL, I think, in Casey Rogers. So Casey Rogers was the Buccaneers co-defensive coordinator and defensive line coach since 2019. Hey, Cal, tell me if this is good. This is the Buccaneers defensive line rankings since he joined them in 2019. In 2020, starting in 2019, they were the first overall defensive line in the NFL. In 2020, they were the first overall defensive line in the NFL. 2021, they were the third overall defensive line in the NFL. 2022, they were a fifth overall. 2023, they were fourth overall. And then this past year, 2024, they were once again fifth overall. That's pretty good, right?
I'm gonna say that being top 5 in the NFL for 6 straight years, I think that's pretty good. I think I'm gonna go with good for that one.
A lot of people were talking about him being leaving the Buccaneers, but to go take an actual defensive coordinator job, getting that natural promotion just because of the job that he's done there in Tampa Bay. So to get him on this staff and not as a DC, as his same position, I think is an absolute win for us. I mean, just a home run hire.
Yeah, love it. I absolutely love it. Yeah, defensive line coach. I mean, it's a very important position, coach. Like you said, our defensive line, they struggled down the stretch in 2024. And yeah, some of it was injury led, but I do think that this, I mean, it's got to help, man. I mean, Casey Rogers, his resume speaks for itself. It's just what he's been able to do for the Tampa Bay Bucks. Tampa Bay Bucks have had an awesome run defense for as long as I can remember. So yeah, hats off on that hire.
It definitely helps that they have the big boy up front, Vita Vea, who's literally probably the best rushing defender in the NFL at like 6'5", 350 pounds. Mm-hmm. I mean, just a literal mountain there. And so it definitely helps that the personnel that Casey Rogers had on his defensive line, maybe he brings some of those guys over the next few, free agency classes with him. Either way you look at it, it's just an absolutely fantastic hire on the defensive line. And again, people thought he was going to be a defensive coordinator somewhere this offseason. So to get him as defensive line coach was fantastic. And that kind of moves us into our defensive coordinator. So if you recall last week, we talked about it. Pretty much everyone in the NFL assumed that the case in the situation for the Lions was that they were going to, obviously we had an OC and a DC positions to fill. I don't recall if we had actually lost Aaron Glenn as of this time last week, but the expectation was he was all but gone. So we had 2 positions to fill. The expectation, I think, for most people was that they were going to fill one internally and fill one externally, and that the internal position that we were filling was going to be somewhat of a new hire, someone in an up-and-coming, someone who doesn't have that experience, but they were going to pair that with an exterior proven coordinator. And I think the expectation originally was that the offensive side was going to be the internal hire, someone who is not yet proven, but is up and coming, someone like Tanner Eggstrom, who we'll get to in a little bit, someone like Hank Fraley, or someone that hasn't been an OC yet, and the exterior or the defensive coordinator was going to be the exterior hire, someone who's proven. They kind of went out and flipped that on its head by doing the interior promotion on the defensive side with Kelvin Sheppard.
Yeah, I didn't see it coming. I don't think anyone really saw it coming. But yeah, Kelvin Sheppard, come on, you're promoted. I do love it. I mean, he's young guy. He's been with this team for I think only 3 years. Maybe this is his 4th year as with the Lions. But yeah, he's 37 years old. He has high energy, high passion. I think he's a no BS type of coach, and he really seems like he's just a great leader of men, loved by his teammates. I've heard testimonies from teammates when he played in the NFL. Just this week after it was announced that he was hired as the defensive coordinator, seems like he's loved by them. He's certainly loved by his own players that he coached for the with the Lions. And I think we probably all remember that Hard Knocks clip, or at least I remember the Hard Knocks clip from when the Lions were on Hard Knocks in I think 2022 or 2023, when Sheppard was chewing out the Detroit Lions linebacker room while also praising Rodrigo, who was a rookie at the time, and he was completely outplaying all of the starters. And I really liked that. It's obviously just a small clip. It's Hard Knocks, so take it with a grain of salt. But I think it does kind of show that he can hold his players accountable, and his players do really care about him. Yeah.
I was surprised. I mean, they brought in, going back to Tampa Bay, they brought in Larry Foote, or at least they were talking about bringing in Larry Foote to be interviewed. He was the Buccaneers passing game coordinator and current linebackers coach, kind of going all in on Tampa Bay. Larry Foote, a Michigan man, kind of everyone thought, at least as soon as that name was floated out there, that he makes a lot of sense that they would bring him in. Again, pair him with a first-time OC and have that experience versus non-experience kind of working together to create the offense and defense. I liked the Kelvin Sheppard. It was interesting because at the very beginning of the season, even before AG went out and took this position, or really was being tossed around, Aaron Glenn came out and said that Kelvin Sheppard is someone that it will be, not even like if, but when, will be a defensive coordinator. So this whole season he was training him and teaching him, the processes of being a defensive coordinator and all that jazz. So it's kind of nice to know that we do kind of reward that. We did have a guy who was kind of in training. Hopefully, whether you like Aaron Glenn, you like the defense. At times I was in love with the defense. At times I hated the defense. It seems like maybe it'll be more of the same, just keeping the same guys in there. So it'll be interesting with Kelvin Sheppard. I'm here for it. A young, energetic guy. Like you said, all the players love him. But I did put together a blind resume. So I put this together before Sheppard was actually named as the DC, but I thought it'd still be fun. So I'm going to give you these stats, and you tell me if you would take this. Again, before Sheppard, take Sheppard out of the equation. Let me know if you would take this as our defensive coordinator. He has ties to Detroit. During his time as coaching, he averaged the 7th best scoring defense. That was over, I think it was over 7 seasons. He averaged the 7th best scoring defense, 2 Super Bowls, 2 conference champions, and is currently coaching in the Super Bowl once again. So if that guy is available, are you taking him as your DC?
It almost seems too good to be true. Like, yeah, I mean, he's coaching the Super Bowl right now. I don't know if he'd be available. Yeah, I mean, just looking at those stats, I would love to have the 7th best scoring defense and a guy who has 2 Super Bowls and, of course, 2 conference championships. Who is that? It's like Steve Spagnuolo or like who? I have no idea who that is.
So that was, average the 7th best, and he had a few first best defensive in there. Congratulations, Kyle. Your new defensive coordinator is Matt Patricia.
Oh, shit. All right, I take back everything I said.
I saw people legitly talking, and they were probably being tongue-in-cheek, and people were talking about bringing back a few different guys, Jim Caldwell and stuff. But Patricia's name was floated out there by a few different guys, and you look back at his stats, that's why I was putting together this blind resume. His defense was good. If you to go back and listen to his when he was getting basically roasted as a coach here in Detroit, he mentioned he has probably the best defensive play in Super Bowl history against the Seahawks. So I don't know, man.
Dude, no. Give that guy the furthest away from Detroit that he could possibly be. I don't care. I don't care about anything he's done, any accolades he has. If he ever stepped foot in Ford Field again, it'd be an absolute travesty. No.
Yeah, I'm taking Kelvin Sheppard. I'm taking the player loved, unproven guy who's been with Detroit before, and Kelvin Sheppard as DC. I thought, like I said, I was putting that together, and I was kind of surprised by his numbers, but there's no way he would ever be welcome back. I know he's made some amends with some players and stuff, but the fans just would never bring him back. So, so outside of DC, we got Kelvin Sheppard filling that hole. A few of the other holes that were to be filled, both were internally guys we were able to keep around. We talked last week about Hank Fraley being interviewed for the Seattle Seahawks offensive coordinator position, and then Tanner Eggstrand, who was in consideration for our own offensive coordinator position and some other positions as well. Both of those guys, as of now, are remaining with Detroit. Now, Hank Fraley is 100% being retained. He is being promoted from the offensive line coach to the run game coordinator and offensive line coach. So he's getting a promotion. He will be staying in Detroit. He was someone that, I mean, a lot of these different coaches are super important to retain. I think Tanner will be super important to retain, but I think Hank Fraley was like the one I was just absolutely dreading on seeing leave. We went into last week, we talked about it, how Frank Ragnow, he was asked about it, and Frank was saying how he will sabotage any interview that Hank Fraley has. He hasn't not played with him his entire career, and he wasn't willing to not play with him moving forward. Hank is absolutely fantastic. Going back to the Hard Knocks episodes that you mentioned, Hank was kind of a mainstay in those episodes, and it's just put together an absolutely elite offensive line here in Detroit for years now. And he was someone that I did not want to see go. To see him stay and to get a promotion, I think was just so important for this team.
Hank Fraley he's an awesome coach, and love that he's getting a promotion. It's a well-deserved promotion. I think anytime that you can have continuity in your offensive line room, that's gigantic. It's huge. I mean, this league is built big men up front. So being able to retain him, love that. I know I kind of alluded to it, but you just mentioned Tanner Eggstrom as well. He's the current passing game coordinator for the Lions. There has been rumors today that he's going to actually be poached by the New York Jets and go over with Aaron Glenn and become his offensive coordinator. And really, I would love to hear your thoughts on it, Tyler. I don't think I could hold him accountable at all. It'd be a promotion. He'd be an offensive coordinator. He'd be, coaching alongside Aaron Glenn, who he knows very well. Obviously, they both coached on the Lions last year. I couldn't fault it. I mean, if the Lions aren't going to elevate him to offensive coordinator, and obviously they're not, because we'll talk about the reports of John Morton. I can't hold Tanner Ekstrand accountable for if he leaves. I think more power to him.
No, I agree. Going into the situation, you had Hank Fraley and you had Tanner Ekstrand, and you even had Scotty Montgomery, 3 absolutely elite offensive coaches. You assumed one of them would be getting the promotion to OC just because all 3 of them are so worthy and deserving of that position. And then the other 2, it was kind of like, would you be able to retain maybe one of them? You assume at least one of them would leave and go be an OC somewhere else because they deserve that. You thought maybe you can keep one around, but there was a real chance that you kind of promote one of them and then you lose the other 2. The Lions kind of, like we said, we thought that they were going to hire internally with the offensive coordinator, and you just alluded to it. We'll get to Johnny Morton in a minute, but they went external for the offensive coordinator, so there was a chance you could lose all 3 of these guys in Hank and Tanner and Scotty Montgomery. It's you cannot blame Tanner for going out and getting that promotion that he is deserving. I'm honestly a little bit surprised that it didn't go to Tanner. Tanner seemed just as much Kelvin was being groomed to be the defensive coordinator. Tanner was being groomed to be the offensive coordinator. So I was surprised to see this, to see him not get that position. I'm surprised in a good way to see that we were able to retain Hank on a small promotion there. But yeah, Tanner, as of now, he is still in Detroit. Both the news of Hank and Tanner being in Detroit, for the foreseeable future, was actually broke on the internet by their wives on Facebook, which was absolutely hilarious. Everyone was suddenly the biggest, Mrs. Fraley and Mrs. Engstrand fans as they were breaking that they're staying in Detroit. Then obviously Hank got the promotion. It was announced, so he actually is staying. Like you said, Tanner might be leaving. I can't blame him. It's a natural progression. He's a young guy who I would assume eventually will work his way up to a head coaching position. So I would hate to see him go, but I can't blame him either.
Yeah. So we'll see. And again, these are just rumors right now that he might be going to the Jets. Think nothing is official yet, but yeah, should we move on to probably the biggest news, and that is that Adam Schefter is reporting that Johnny Morton is expected to receive the offensive coordinator position for the Detroit Lions. So I don't know, is it official yet, or is it still just a report right now?
Yeah, so when I was putting together show notes, it was just a report. Since we put the notes together, it has been confirmed. So Johnny Morton is the new offensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions. Johnny, just a quick information on Johnny Morton. So he is a former player, has really bounced around the league for quite some time, since 2002, honestly. He started as a coach in the league at 33. He's been under a number of different head coaches that are really a really good resume in that regard. He's worked with John Gruden. He's worked with some of the Harbaughs. He's worked with Sean Payton, a number of different elite level head coaches. Most recently, he was the offensive coordinator for the New York Jets in 2017 under Todd Bowles. He was eventually fired from that position. We'll get into that in a second. Then he actually was here in Detroit in 2022 under Dan Campbell, so there was a little bit of familiarity with that. He understands Jared. He understands that process and how the offense was set up. I know it's very different now than it was in 2022 even, but he has some information or some familiarity there. He was with Detroit as a senior offensive assistant. He left Detroit in 2023 to go to the Denver Broncos to be the passing game coordinator, where he's been for the past 2 years. And we all saw, like we said, we can get into his time with the Jets, but before we do so, I just want to point out, his time with the Broncos, we saw how good of a player Bo Nix was this year, how Bo Nix was able to take his first year in the NFL and really run with it. And I think he was just the offense or the passing game coordinator for the Broncos. So he wasn't fully in charge of the offense, but I thought the Broncos passed the ball really well this year. So in that regard, I'm kind of excited.
Yeah, I think the Broncos are, they were ranked maybe the 20th passing offense in the league this year. But yeah, I agree. I mean, they had a rookie quarterback, right? So, I mean, I'd say, I think all things considered, the way that Bo Nix played this season, and, he was pretty good. And it's hard to know how much of that, goes on the offensive passing coordinator, John Morton at the time in Denver, but it can't be a bad thing. I think just maybe a couple more things on Johnny Morton's background. He's an Auburn Hills kid. through and through. So yeah, he
Yep.
grew up right down the street from where Tyler and I grew up in Lake Orion, Michigan. Went to Avondale High School, Metro Detroit. But yeah, you alluded to it, Tyler. He's a career offensive assistant. He's held just a slew of jobs in the NFL and in college football. He did coach at college football for USC. He was the offensive coordinator, wide receivers coordinator for a couple of years there. So he's really bounced around a lot. So I don't know if that's a good thing, if that's a bad thing. He's held positions all the way up to offensive coordinator briefly for the Jets, and all the way down to receivers coach and offensive assistant, so tight ends coach. He's done a little bit of everything. So to say that he doesn't have experience in the NFL would be a flat out lie. It's just that he really doesn't have a ton of experience as an offensive coordinator. So there's probably a lot of unknown.
Yeah, I'm not going to sit here and pretend, that you and I know the ins and outs of John Morton and how he works and what he likes to do. I will say all the numbers, as soon as he got released, we already mentioned it. I was surprised by the hiring. I was surprised by him himself, and that it wasn't. I was also surprised that it wasn't an internal candidate. But looking back at his numbers, as soon as it was announced, I went and did a quick deep dive on him. So like I said, he was the Jets offensive coordinator in 2017. He was fired by Todd Bowles. There were a number of different reasons. We talked about this last week when we touched on Aaron Glenn and the Jets and stuff. And we talked about even, if you're a longtime listener, back when we were talking about the trade deadline about Hassan Reddick and, a few different things about the Jets in general. The Jets have coming from a Lions fan, the Jets have a very tumultuous past. They are, a team a franchise that is kind of long storied as a little bit upside down and just struggles really. So take it with a grain of salt, all the quote unquote issues that he had with the Jets. But apparently he butted heads a lot with Todd Bowles. He supposedly he is a pass first offensive coordinator, but he supposedly has a hard time putting together the run game scheme, especially when he was with the Jets there. But I want to say a few things. So first and foremost, we had just talked about the Lions offensive staff. They were able to retain, as of this recordings, they were able to retain Scott Montgomery, and then obviously Hank Fraley. I think it's really going to be kind of an offensive coaching by committee, and I kind of hope it's an offensive coaching by committee. There's so many bright minds in this, in that offensive staff room, that I hope they kind of just bounce and work together as a team. If John Morton is a passing first offensive coordinator and struggles to put together a rushing scheme, he's got one of the best running back coaches in Scott Montgomery and best offensive line coaches in Hank Fraley. So they can kind of work together, all three of them in tandem, to put together the best offensive scheme that, really fits the offense and fits here with the Lions. Looking back at that Jets offense in 2017, so they were the 15th ranked offense, 54% red zone success rate, 400, and like I said, he was really pass heavy as opposed to running heavy, 427 rushing attempts for about 1,700 rushing yards. And then he had 510 passing attempts for about 3,100 passing yards. So, a little bit under 100 more passing attempts than rushing attempts, which makes sense. But numbers aside, you look at he was kind of scapegoated a little bit his time with the Jets, because you look at the staff and the players that he was working with. His quarterback was a 38-year-old Josh McCown. His running back was Bilal Powell, and his other running back was Matt Forte. And if that doesn't take you back to the early to late 2000s, 2010s, I don't know what does. I mean, his staff his player personnel was less than par. So I think he was scapegoated a little bit. Look, just comparing those numbers to what the Lions did last year. So again, he had 510 passing attempts for 3,100 yards. Last year, the Lions had 551 passing attempts and 4,474 yards. So honestly, we passed the ball even more than he did during his time there. But the other thing we did, we just ran more plays overall. We rushed the ball 534 times last season. Obviously, like I said, when he was 2017 with the Jets, he rushed it 427. Now offenses have evolved, since 2017, but we were much more level offense last year. We'll see if that kind of continues. If we do start to lean towards passing, maybe having the running back duo that we have in Montgomery and Gibbs will kind of force his hand to run the ball more. It's a little bit interesting.
For sure. There's a lot to unpack there with Johnny Morton. I think the good thing is, the silver lining that I can look at, a lot of times when offensive coordinators or, coaches come in, they bring their own coordinators in. A lot of times it's because the team is in disarray. They fired their last coach. There's things that are not going well. That's not the case here, where obviously you just alluded to it, Tyler, but, Johnny Morton is coming into, one of, if not the best offensive rooms in all of the National Football League. So, it's almost like, I don't want to judge it that, you can't mess it up, but like, you can't really mess it up. You have awesome coaches under you that, are proven and they know how this offense works. So yeah, you can put your own spins on it, your own wrinkles on it. But at the end of the day, like, we know what works in the Detroit Lions offense. So yeah, just, if it's not broke, like, don't even try fixing it.
Yeah, and we know how much Dan Campbell is involved in the coaching and offensive play calling. We know all the fourth down times he goes for it. And even, when Dan Campbell first took over for Anthony Lynn as OC, like, Dan Campbell is so heavily involved in the offensive play calling. So you're right. It is, even if it was just John Morton being the OC and calling the plays and stuff, it would probably be pretty difficult to fail. But knowing that Dan Campbell is also going to have a heavy say in that, what kind of should alleviate any of the concerns about, his getting fired when he was with the Jets and stuff. I saw a few different quotes, though, that I thought were important. So Dan Campbell in 2023, when John Morton left to go to be the Broncos passing game coordinator, said of John Morton, what John Morton did for us on an offense this year was pivotal, and it was all behind the scenes. I'm not sure how everybody understands just how important he was. Johnny's a superstar now, and there's a number of things that he did for us last year that are things that we kept. So he kind of was helping lay the groundwork for this offense, the offense that we've come to know and love. And then one final stat I saw that, again, should hopefully just alleviate any sort of Jets firing concerns or anything. Johnny Morton's 2017 Jets team had more opening drive touchdowns than Ben Johnson's 2024 Lions. And we talked about a lot how, for some reason, offenses are supposed to do well in their first drive because it's so scripted, and they go down, they run their plays, and then if the wheels are going to come off, they're going to come off because it's not scripted and stuff. How the Lions were absolutely backwards somehow, that the first drive, they always struggled, and then they kind of kick it into gear after that. John Morton didn't do that. He scored more opening drive touchdowns than Ben Johnson last year. So I don't know. All right. So let's keep it moving. We do have a listener voicemail coming in from Greg touching on the Lions. So let's listen to that here, and then we can go ahead and discuss that.
Hey, guys. This is Greg, first-time listener, long-time caller, calling about your podcast last week about the Lions and how some people are saying that you're not a true Lions fan if you're angry with the Lions results because it was a great season. And I think you guys made a very good point that you can be both. And I would have to say, being an older person, is that I've been with the Lions through thick and thin. I was at the Silverdome when there was the smallest attendance on record. I've been at the Silverdome when there was more Green Bay fans or Chicago Bear fans than there were Lions fans. And I just want to say that your point was very good. You can be both. And I think you have a right to be able to be angry for Campbell to go on and say how, we're going to chew up people's kneecaps and we're going to fight till the end. And then to lay an egg like they did on that game, the fans have been just disillusioned by all this. They've been promised so much and nothing to show for it. The Lions didn't come to the game prepared. They looked flat. And I think we have a right to be angry and to say, you guys are feeding us bullshit. You say you're going to do this and the results show differently. So I think it was a very good point that you brought up. It is fair. And we're not measuring people's fandom by, just salivating over the Lions, saying, oh, they did so great. They had a great season. They did have a good season. But now they need to go further. They need to prove themselves more and bring us home. And damn it, we deserve a Super Bowl. We do. That's all I want to say. Thanks.
Awesome. Hey, Greg, first of all, man, voicemail. I know, first time, long time. Dude, awesome voicemail. And I love what you said. We're a lot of people saying that we're not true Lions fans because we're angry at how the season ended, and I completely agree with you, man. that's bullshit. Pardon my French. That's absolute bullshit. Like, both things can be true. We can celebrate a fantastic season, but we can also be pissed off by the ending of it. And yeah, laying that egg against the Commanders when you're the home team. I do think that we had a ton of expectations, and those expectations were, to win a Super Bowl. And I love how you Greg, you mentioned the Silverdome days and the dark days. I mean, Tyler's 28. I just turned 29. I know you're turning 29 in a couple weeks, Ty. We've seen some just absolutely shitty football for decades. And you can go back decades further before either of us were alive, and you see some more shitty football. So yeah, it is easy to celebrate that we had a good season, but I think that's BS. And when you become a top tier, when you are in that echelon of being a top tier team in the NFL, you should be pissed off when your team lays an egg in the most important game of the season at home, when all roads lead to the Super Bowl or leading through Detroit. You can be pissed. So yeah, if anyone is calling out, my fandom or Tyler's fandom because we're pissed off, I'm gonna tell them to F off, because this is, if we expect Super Bowls, then we have to act like it's all hell is breaking loose when we don't get there, because you laid that egg and you didn't do what you're supposed to do. You didn't do your job, and we expect a lot from this team. So Greg, just want to say, love the voicemail, and we're with you, man. We expect more, and I think next year it's definitely Super Bowl or bust again, because this is your window.
It's important to know where we're going. You can move you could and you have to move the goalpost. We have to remember that we are not the Lions of old. We're not the Lions, like Greg mentioned, that we're at the Silverdome, being vastly outnumbered. We're now a team and a franchise that travels extremely well. We're the most watched team in the NFL this season. We are a team that expects to be in the Super Bowl. We're at a level where that is the expectation. And like I said, like Greg said, like Kyle has said, you can kind of play both sides. You can be happy with the season. We talked last week about how much fun we had watching all those games, watching Ben Johnson work a perfect offensive play call, watching Aaron Glenn absolutely perfect defensive scheme against the Vikings. Like, we can have fun about that, but then when they fall flat, we need to realize that we are not this, we were playing with house money, we made it into the playoffs again. Like, that's not where we're at anymore. That's, in my opinion, that's a loser thinking. We are at a point where it's Super Bowl or bust, and I think that's a great point, kind of tying into what we were just talking about with all these new coaches that we're bringing in, that this is not the coaching staff that we brought in, in 2022, in which we were still trying to right the ship and just really all about trying to get that culture going. And we had 3 wins last season. Let's make it to 6, and then let's try and get make the playoffs. And then playoff when this staff needs to be coming in and hitting the ground running, understanding that this is not a sorry franchise anymore. This is a Super Bowl or bust franchise, and the fans know that. The fans also need to kind of get on board with that as well, that goalpost has been moved. It no longer is getting to the playoffs. It no longer is winning a playoff game. It's to get to the Super Bowl and to win a Super Bowl. So these guys need to kind of come in and be ready to take on that mentality, and the fans need to take on the mentality with them. And I think they will. It's not all stormy skies ahead. I think these guys that they brought in, like we said, the guys and the coaches that we were able to retain were huge. I think the guys that we brought in are going to be super important. So I really like the voicemail. Thanks, Greg, for calling in. Again, we'll leave the number at the end of the show so you guys can call in, give us your thoughts on the Lions, any sort of other Detroit sports, anything in Detroit in general. We opened the show with Lafayette, Coney Island. You want to tell us about Lafayette versus American? I'll tell you that you're wrong if you're choosing American over Lafayette, but you want to talk about that, leave a voicemail and do so. We'll bring that up. So thank you for the call, Greg. Let's keep moving. We've talked enough about the Lions. We've kind of spent the last 6 months really talking about the Lions, and rightfully so throughout their season. But I want to take a moment to talk about the Pistons as well, just because the Pistons are doing something that we really haven't seen in the NBA in I would say at least 10, 15, 20 years maybe even. And that's that so many times in today's NBA, you see these players that in the off season, they're going on vacations with each other, and they're, after they play in, a different team, they're going on opposing players' podcasts, and they're talking about the game and talking about playing against each other and this and that, and, different states of the league. And that never would have happened back in the 80s and 90s. You go back to the bad boy Pistons versus, Michael's Bulls. They absolutely hated each other. You go back to any of the other teams back then, and there was so much bad blood and hatred, true hatred for other teams. It was I got my teams back, all my boys, and if you come into our plays and we're playing you, we're probably looking for blood. And that just is kind of lost in today's NBA. And the Pistons are doing what teams haven't done in quite some time, and that's like going out and making enemies. They're not going out and making friends. They're actually like kind of reviving these rivalries, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. You look at them going against like the Orlando Magic this week, the Indiana Pacers, over the last few weeks, the Knicks, generally the New York Knicks, we've had a lot of shit talking going on. The Rockets, I mean, I absolutely love that they're going back to that hard mentality of the NBA of years past.
Yeah, it's sick, man. It's awesome. It kind of reminds me a little bit of like, the grittiness and the smash mouth of the Pistons of old, right? The bad boys, even the going to work Pistons, like they weren't in this business to make friends. Yeah, I really like it. Especially Cade, versus Jalen Green. I love that one. I think Cade is easily the better player there. But I mean, they're both phenomenal, right? So yeah, just any kind of little rivalry can there. Yeah, you mentioned the Pacers. Obviously, there's some bad blood between the Pistons and the Pacers, all the way back to the Malice at the Palace. Like, yeah, I really like it. And I think, it's an identity that can work for, a young team that, maybe needs that kind of grit and that little extra push to win games. Because, they've had a great season, right? I'm just looking at the rankings right now. They're, the standings. They're, right at 500, 23 and 23. They have lost a couple games in a row. But, overall, good season, and I fight. I love seeing the fight out of them because we've watched this Pistons team, even like the Blake Griffin teams that limped into the playoffs. I feel like they didn't have any fight. We haven't really seen fight since. You could probably go all the way back to the 2005, 2006, 2007 seasons when we were at just off that 2004 championship. But I haven't seen a lot of fight out of the Pistons in decades, so I'm loving this.
Even going back, you mentioned the Blake Griffin Pistons. That I agree with you in that like there was no real identity. That season was Blake going absolutely nuclear and putting an entire franchise on his back and carrying us to the playoffs, and then obviously getting swept. But coming off a season last year that was so historically bad and like numbers wise bad, but also Monty Williams himself literally had no identity last year. You look back at games and he literally was just standing there on the sideline, arms crossed, stoic, no expression on his face, and you saw times in timeouts and after games that like Cade was visibly just frustrated with the lack of emotion and direction for this team. JB Bickerstaff has brought that grittiness and, like you said, that sort of toughness and fighting mentality to this team. You look back, I mean, you mentioned the Pacers and going back to the Malice at the Palace, but I mean, Benedict Mathurin versus Jaden Ivey, that started last year, 2 years ago, just because they were drafted around the same time, that suddenly they have this beef, and it's Benedict Mathurin versus Jaden Ivey. And naturally, each time we go up against them, it's kind of must-see TV. I want to see how Ben Mathurin does against Jaden Ivey and who kind of gets the better of who. You look at Orlando, like we said, Orlando beat the Pistons earlier this week. But going back to even last year, of all guys, Killian Hayes got in a fight with Mo Wagner, and bodies end up being thrown over the bench. I mean, it was a dirty play that the Magic were running, and Killian wasn't taking any of it. And Killian's obviously no longer with the franchise. You can think whatever you want about Killian, a bust, whatever. But he still was trying to give us that fighting mentality. You look now, this year you had Jalen Suggs dive in for a loose ball in a meaningless game in the fourth quarter that ended up breaking Jaden Ivey's leg. Just when we played earlier this week, Tobias Harris and Asar Thompson both caught like an elbow to the head. Tobias had to come out of the game for a concussion. He's ruled as questionable. I mean, and then later in the game, you had Jalen Suggs again diving for a loose ball that ended up taking Cade out at the knees. And thank God Cade was able to kind of come across it and be okay. But Isaiah Stewart's going back and forth with these guys. We're fighting with them. teams, you hear the old heads talking, on their podcast. They're all retired, so they can have podcasts and bring other guys on. I don't care. But guys like Kevin Garnett, who was, the masters of shit talking, and you did not want to go up against Kevin Garnett because he was gonna elbow you. He was gonna, when you got into the paint, he was gonna punish you. He was gonna bully you. He was gonna talk shit. And you hear guys like them talking on their podcast that this Detroit team is for real. You don't want to go play in Detroit because they're gonna hit you in the mouth. They're gonna hit you in the mouth by their play, but they're also going to hit you in the mouth, probably physically and literally, because they're going to play you physical. They're going to basically be out for blood, and it's us versus you. And I absolutely love that. It's something that we've missed in the NBA. You got, Steph Curry and LeBron James that are, talking about creating mega teams and wanting to go play with each other, and going back to the Banana Boat Boys, LeBron James, Carmelo Anthony, Chris Paul, Dwayne Wade, they're going on vacations together. It's like, going back, Kobe never went on vacation with any other guys. When he was in the NBA season, he hated everyone that wasn't on his team, and when it was the off season, he was only by himself working. I mean, that's the kind of mentality this Pistons team has taken on, and I absolutely love it.
Dude, hell yeah. I'm ready to run through a brick wall right now just talking about this Pistons team. And I mean, this is a team that, it's a 500 team. It's not like it's a championship team right now, but I mean, this is something that the fans can get behind. And I love your point about, we're going to go in and we're going to hit you in the mouth. And I do want to point out, we're not talking about playing dirty. There's a difference between, playing dirty and just playing physical and tough, So we're talking about, playing obviously within the rules, but, still having that, grittiness and, just playing tough. And like you said, you don't want to, back down in the paint against, our big man, or, if you're the opposing team, it's like, wow, shit, now we got to play the Pistons and we might get beat up a little bit. Certainly not talking about playing dirty, but certainly talking about playing physical. And I love it. I love what I'm seeing out of these Pistons.
It's very similar. Throughout the whole entire NFL season, we talked about the Honolulu flu and how teams that literally, you could follow the team that played Detroit last week. They were going to come out sluggish and likely, I don't remember the actual numbers in front of me, they came out and most of the time lost the week after playing the Lions because the Lions were so physical and brought it every single play. And this Pistons team under JB Bickerstaff is kind of doing the exact same thing. And I love it. You mentioned it's a 500 team. It definitely is. Will we make the playoffs? I'm thinking so. But will we buy? Will we sell at the deadline? Who's to say? But I just love that we're absolutely just at least getting an identity. And kind of going off that, NBA trade deadline is next week, so we haven't put our show notes together for next week's episode, but I assume a lot of it will be talking about the Pistons, talking about who we can go out and get, if we need to buy, sell, whatever. It's a week from tomorrow, so it'll be next Wednesday. So hopefully we can jump into that, spend a whole episode talking about that for you guys. So that's what I want to talk about the Pistons. Love what they're doing. Let's jump to the Red Wings.
Yeah, let's do it. Wings, last night, huge win against the LA Kings. Kings are in third place in the Pacific. They are a very good team in this league, and I loved what I see. Love what I saw out of the Red Wings. Sider had just a horrendous own goal, which these things happen, but it was really, really bad. He'd be the first to tell you that. Yeah, he messed up big time with that one. But after that own goal, the boys rattled off 5 straight goals of their own to secure the dub, 5-2. So. Yeah, it was huge. They've been a bit up and down the past week and a half. This is their 3rd straight win, and they need to keep winning. They are 2 points back of the 2nd wild card spot right now in the East, and I think it could go either way. I would love to hear your view on this, Tyler, but it could go either way as if they're a buyer or a seller at the deadline. I personally, I would hate to see them sell just because. I do think they have the pieces there. They have similar pieces from last year. It just seems like they're underperforming in general this season. But what do you think on that? Are they going to buy? Are they going to sell? Stay put?
I think there's been a lot of talk. We talked for years about the Yzer plan and how it hasn't really come to fruition. Obviously, in the NHL, there's the literal firing of a coach boom that you kind of rejuvenates a team, and we're seeing that with Detroit. So whether it actually is that the just kind of rejuvenation from firing a coach or the Yzer plan starting to take form, it's hard to say. If that is the Yzer plan starting to take place and starting to come to fruition, I would say we're not going to sell. But just knowing Yzerman, it's a boring answer, but I would also say we're not going to buy. He's not one that likes to give out term. He's not one that likes to give away, the farm for different guys. And we're starting to bring these guys up. I mean, you look at the game last night against the Kings. it was all the young boys making the plays. You had Lucas, who had a goal and 3 assists. Marco Casper with 2 goals and 1 assist. Elmer Soderblom got his first goal. I mean, it was the young wings that were, took it to the Kings, which was super important that we beat them. Obviously, the Kings were the team that fired Todd McClellan last year. Todd is obviously, our new head coach. So I think it was important in there. And we also went down 2-0, and so it was important to come back. And so if I were to guess, and there's a lot of time, yeah, we'll talk about the Pistons next week because the deadline is next week. So there's a lot of time. I think the NHL trade deadline is in March. So we have some time to kind of figure out whether this is just the coaching boom or if it actually is the Yzer plan starting to come to fruition and the young boys are starting to play well and play together and kind of have something. But I will say, as of now, I would be shocked if they're sellers. Even just kind of where we're at right now with all the young boys, I think we're not going to be sellers. I think the only kind of question is, do we move to get one or two more pieces without selling the farm that kind of put us firmly into the playoffs and try and make a run, or do we kind of continue coasting on this upward trajectory and continue to coast or trust the Yzer plan for a little bit longer? It'll be interesting to tell. I think we'll know more over the next month.
For sure. Yeah. We'll definitely know more. And just one more thing on the Red Wings. You mentioned Lucas Raymond. I just want to say, I mean, we've talked about it a bit, but how good is Lucas Raymond? He's awesome. I mean, this is, it's his 4th season now in the NHL. He's only 22 years old, so he started his career at a very, very young age for a hockey player. There's a lot of times, guys don't even get into the league until they're about his age. So he's already on his 4th season, and he's just on an incredible clip right now of points. He's doing it all. Goals and assists. He has 20 goals, 36 assists for 52 points on the season. Last year. Tremendous season last year. Last year was his best to date, 72 points in 82 games. So, I mean, he's already, approaching his points level from last season. I think he's on pace for, it's got to be in the mid-90s at least.
Yeah, I think he's
now.
90 or something, yeah.
Yeah, that's his pace. So I just wanted to give a shout out to the young man who is, quickly becoming a young star in this league. And in my opinion, he's the best player under the age of 23 in the NHL.
Yeah, Lucas Raymond, longtime listener of the pod. I know you're listening right now. Shout out to you, my man. I know for listeners from a few weeks ago, you recall you put me on probation from going to Red Wings games after we lost to the San Jose Sharks 6-3. Has that probation been lifted? I don't have any plans to go, but has it been lifted? Can I go to games now that we've won 3 in a row?
You know what? It's lifted. Yep. They've won 3 in a row. You've done your time. You are on a bit of a probation. If you go again and they lose, we might have to just revoke that again. But yeah, right now I'm going to say you're okay to go back.
Okay, and they play at the Oilers on the 30th, so they got some time until they're back in Detroit. So I appreciate the lifting of that, and I'll definitely, I swear, I'll be on my best behavior, try and get some wins when they do come back in town. But
good.
All right, that is our show. Thank you guys all for tuning in to this week's episode. You can find us on Twitter at Dutton_Tyler and Kyle_Marino. You can join the conversation next week by calling into the Gridiron Report voicemail for us to play and discuss on the podcast. That number is 313-306-7939. And finally, if you like this episode, please take a moment to rate it 5 stars and leave a review saying so. It means a lot to us. And thank you guys for joining us.
Restore the roar.
Yeah. Every highlight's a journey, roads paved with fire, sweat, tears, and hustle that never expire. From the rookies on the rise to the old hands retired, grit iron is the place for fans to conspire. Hustle on, blast beats thundering loud. Champions are born from the roar of the crowd. The Gridiron Report, where the stories are proud. Tune in, bring the heat, make your fandom a vow.